Two prominent members of President Trump's campaign team were indicted on Monday, much of it dealing with violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act, more commonly known as FARA. Alex Miller joins us now. You've been looking at FARA today because in this indictment, it factored prominently. However, many people are not familiar with this law.
Right, and part of the reason that people aren't familiar with the law is because it hasn't been used in a while. So most people have heard of FARA because of Paul Manafort and in recent months. But the reality is this law has been around for almost 80 years. But the difference is there haven't been any successful prosecutions of the law in more than half a century.
FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act. It deals with a part of Washington arguably the swampiest of them all. These are not only lobbyists, but people who are working in the interest of a foreign country. And those countries aren't necessarily U.S. allies. The law requires these men and women to periodically disclose related activities and finances for the government to track. And that's because these lobbyists are U.S. citizens themselves, and the government wants to follow their work to make sure it's above the board. It's the idea of transparency, of truth in advertising. But like I said before, some of these people are working against U.S. interests, and that, in combination with financial disclosure, makes many people and the firms they work for want to keep this info private. But that's against the law, though it has been lax for decades. A foreign agent is supposed to register with the Department of Justice within 10 days of taking the job, but many people don't because they aren't worried about being caught. The law was used successfully 23 times during World War II prosecutions, but it hasn't been used successfully since it was amended in 1966 to increase the government's burden of proof.
So I talked to retired Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer about why this hasn't been used in so long and whether Robert Mueller kind of opened up a can of worms. And
Resurrected.
Yeah, exactly. And whether we're going to see all these people registering that should have been registered a long time ago. Well, there haven't been any convictions since 1966 under this FARA law. Why do you think it's been so lax for the last 50 years?
Because I think this town is corrupt. I think you have a lot of folks who see the money, they start working to get that money, and then once the system is kind of saturated with the money, everybody starts looking the other way. This is one of those issues where I think a lot of folks have figured out tricks to get around the statute or hide from the statute, and that's why you've not seen any prosecution since the 1960s.
So if there's been no prosecution for all these years, is Paul Manafort just a scapegoat for this law, and are they using it against him when it hasn't been enforced for all these years just to kind of get a conviction?
Yes. Look, if you set in motion, a team led by former FBI Director Mueller with the interest of finding something, I mean, let's be honest here, there's no law that covers the so-called crime of collusion. So if you have no actual statute you're investigating the breaking of, you got to do something. No
doubt, though, it sent chills down K Street. Do you think that we're going to start seeing more and more people register now as foreign agents?
I think you're going to see that, especially in light of if they think that the investigation is going to touch them. If you have a new sheriff in town looking at these sorts of issues, I think a lot more folks are going to be paying attention to trying to dot the I's and cross the T's.
The team that looks this stuff up is only 8 people, 3 attorneys. Do they need to staff up on the government end as well?
Well, it depends on what the government wants to do. Look, I don't think you can swing a dead cat in Washington without hitting corruption. And so the question is, do you want to find the corruption or not? If you want to find corruption, it's there. It's a matter of actually having the political will to go after it.
Well, a lot of people think that between the Manafort indictment, the Gates indictment, and the Papadopoulos, that yesterday was really done to send chills across Washington, that there could be more coming. Do you think that maybe some people are going to start trying to retroactively register as foreign agents and get this done?
Oh, I think so. I think, again, because this anytime you have a bombshell go off in Washington, 2 people do pay attention. Yeah, it was a bombshell, no doubt. But the question becomes, who's all going to be most afraid? And I just don't believe the Trump folks are all that afraid of what happened. I think it's more about they're going after some points of minutia, which are, important points, but things are going to make people pay attention, absolutely.
Minutia. Yeah, it's funny. It's minutia until it could land you many years behind bars, right? Okay, so this law, you were doing some history research today, and you told me something I didn't know about this, which is that the law originated And it had to do with Nazis.
Yeah, it's from 1938. It's all because of this man named Ivy Lee. He's known as the father of PR. He was advising the Germans, and it was after one such meeting that members of Congress were really concerned because he had this meeting that it's thought that they discussed Americans' perspective of the Nazis, and Hitler wanted to know what he could do to make Americans more favorable of the Nazis. And once Hitler came to power, Ivy Lee's salary went from $3,000 to $25,000. So the House was very concerned, so they started looking into it. And basically, Ivy Lee said, hey, if I'm going to be transparent with you, I should be able to do this kind of work. So they created FARA, thinking that if they put together this law and people had to register, that maybe they would be less inclined to do something that they shouldn't do. Now, we know that's not really the case.
Yeah.
Some people don't even register, some people do and still do things they shouldn't, and especially because there was a lower form of this registration. So a lot of people don't go all the way to FARA. They do something a little bit more low level so they don't have to disclose it as much.
I bet now that we have current laws about like war criminals and things like that, that you wouldn't be legally allowed to help a foreign government that's accused of.
Well, and these firms are worried about it reflecting poorly on them. It's not just the lobbyists themselves.
Alex, thanks.